Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hi, my name is Nicole, and today I'm here to talk about Neverwinter Nights. I will be talking about Neverwinter Nights 1, the remastered version. I remember things about the original, but I have also had more recent experience with the remastered, so I'll be speaking about both hypothetically. I am somebody who really enjoys top-down video games. I can play first-person games, but honestly, those games give me less of a field of vision than I have in real life. And so I prefer to play things where I'm looking down at myself, looking down at my character, and I have more of a scope of what's going on around me. Neverwinter Nights is very much that game. I believe in later games you can go to first person if you wish. I could be wrong on that, but at least for the original you start out third person only. When I was young, Neverwinter Nights was kind of fuzzy, fading in and out in between things. It was never bad for its time, but the remastering has smoothed out edges and smoothed transitions between scenes. Just yourself and your character running under boulders or through a room or across a bridge now is an incredibly nice just melding of the old view to the new, and it's just a really good game in that aspect. When it comes to quests and performing in figuring out what you're trying to do, the game isn't super... It's not obtuse, but it's also not very clear all the time. You usually have a goal, your quest markers are pretty bare bones, but they'll tell you where to go, they'll tell you what you are trying to do, and the game isn't confusing or, full of things in order to make following those quest directives difficult, which is it's a point very much in its favor. However, that doesn't mean that you can always just know what you're trying to accomplish immediately. Especially in Neverwinter Nights 2, there's a couple of quest points where you kind of just have to go in a direction long enough for the game to be like, okay, here's the footprints you were following. That being said, the game is, as I previously stated, not full of extra things. It still comes from that era of video games where it didn't make sense to waste time and energy and processing power and, frankly, the people trying to create it and their time and energy into making things that you didn't need for the game. We were not at the point where we made things just because we could on screen yet. And so it's not difficult to follow what this game is asking you to do. In the first chapter of Neverwinter Nights, we actually start out in the middle of a plague, the middle of a pandemic. I would actually advise anybody who is more affected by the current pandemic to maybe pull back, skip that chapter, even if it feels weird to skip chapter 1 of a game, go on to the next set of missions, just because, especially if you've lived somewhere where people were actively, literally dying in the streets, this game does a pretty decent job of affecting that atmosphere. And that is what you open up into at the beginning of the game. That being said, if that doesn't bother you, go straight on in. The game does a pretty good job of explaining, if you've played Baldur's Gate, if you've played any of the other games of this ilk from that era, it does a pretty good job of explaining what is going on and what you were supposed to do and how your controls work and what your options are. You can rekey. This was important to me as a person. I always customize almost everything I play. So being able to go in and change what you want that key to be can make or break certain people's game experiences, including mine. It's definitely one of those where you kind of just pick up everything that you can pick up and sell. I tend to play melee characters in this game just because I really I grew up playing characters that felt similar to things that I care about in real life, which meant I kind of stayed away from spellcasters. I'm not learning magic in my day-to-day, and I wasn't 10 years old either, and so I stuck to the ranger and the monk and the rogue, but you can fairly easily, from my limited experience as a spellcaster in this game. I think I've only really made one character who has those abilities. You can pause fairly easily and kind of pre-set up your next command or next attack. You can select individual characters pretty easily to attack. You can single targets out. You can set your spellcast radius, whatever you want, pretty clearly visually. There's no real ambiguity in what your targets are and who you're going to hit and how. The only question that really comes into play is your initiative order, which is not rolled by you physically. It's rolled in the background by the AI. But once you're in that initiative order, you're kind of stuck in it. So much like a roleplay D&D tabletop game, you kind of have to, you're kind of at the mercy of the of the virtual dice at that point. This game is just a pretty solid beginner D&D RPG game. Digital RPG. There are some things that kind of force you to interact with the mechanics of the world. A lot of things that you'll pick up, armor, weapons, potions, will say unidentified, and you can go to specific NPCs to get them identified, or potentially, if your character can learn the skill, identify them yourself for, I believe, 100 gold or 150 gold per item. So it's kind of a steep cost. My character in Chapter 1, I have a character for each Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, because you don't have to build your character up to start a chapter. That's not how this game works. My character is level 5, and I have not been holding on to things that I can sell. I only have 1,800 gold, so, paying 100 or 150 per item that you want to identify when you could have 12 or 13 of those on you at any one time is actually fairly significant. I should actually talk about the inventory space. So the way that the inventory works, you have your things that your character is carrying. You have 6 backpack slots, backpack tabs. Each tab has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 each slot has 60 item slots. However, it's laid out like an actual physical space. So, if you're kind of new to this corner of solo RPGs, if you have a dagger, that might be 1 slot. If you have like a shield, that might be 4 or even 6. So you kind of you have to physically rearrange your backpack in a very tactile way, as tactile as you can really get for a point and click and drag game. But it means that if you are somebody who is more tactile in how you think, playing this game makes a lot of sense, and managing your inventory is very intuitive. On the flip side, if you are not somebody who thinks that way naturally, it can be a little frustrating potentially, because you'll run out of backpack slots when you have backpack slots, and you just have to physically pick up and move and rearrange your inventory to make those backpack slots work for you and not waste any space. And sometimes that's physically not doable. Sometimes your items just don't fit together and there really isn't anything you can do about it. But that's really only if you're picking up pretty heavy, cumbersome, weird shapes, objects. And most of the time, if you have any practice really at managing those things, then it's not too bad. It's physically doable. You can also pick up bags of holding. They're not called that in this game. They're just called magic bags. But if you need to expand your inventory, you have the option of physically picking up an item that then you can open up and put more into it than the slots that it takes up in your backpack. Those magic bags do take up backpack slots. They take up 4 slots, but each of them inside has 20 slots for you to fill. It very much is a helpful item. It's not a harmful one. It doesn't eat up space that you are sitting there desperately needing or anything like that. But it is still something to consider, that if you are, managing your inventory in a particular way, you may or may not want those slots taken up by another bag. Reasons why you wouldn't. Items in those bags physically weigh the same number of pounds that they do outside of it. Sometimes you can get a bag that will reduce the weight of an item, but I don't believe all of them do, or if they do, it's by a negligible enough amount that it didn't really register for me playing it. And if you're filling up your backpack full of, 5-10 pound items anyway, then even if it does knock off a pound or two, it may not actually make that much of a difference weight-wise. But on the other hand, if you're filling your backpack with 1 to 2 pound items, you're probably not worried about weight because you're worried about space. You're just filling up a lot of things in there. The weight you can carry is determined by your character class and your stats. You physically input your stats much the way you do, again, for an RPG, tabletop D&D. You can have a mount, you can have a familiar, you can have a companion. NPCs that can become your companion are pretty easy to pick out. In a conversation with them, they will actively offer to come with you and be your assistant. Going through this game, it would behoove you to pick up anything and talk to anybody. There's no real exceptions to that I can remember. And even if you end up picking something up, looking at it, putting it down, or saying, you know what, I don't have enough inventory space for this, or I don't care about this item, or I don't feel like lugging it around until I can sell it somewhere, it's still worth your while to look at it and see what it physically is. Sometimes you'll pick up big heavy shields that your character physically can't even use and just sell them. It's fine. This game works out really well that way. And because, especially if you're playing solo player, it's just you running around, a good thing to keep in mind is that open chests and barrels and things like that you can open for items, you can also put things in. So it's fairly easy to just stash big heavy things at the beginning of a dungeon and clean out your backpack, so to speak, and then come back and get them afterward. Or even way later in the game if you remember where they are. Soundtrack. This game has a pretty good ambient music. It gives you a good sense of what type of area the creators wanted you to feel like you were in. There's good cave sounds for caves. You have, energizing music for combat. There isn't a huge range of sound, especially compared to some other games that I've played, or compared to an MMO that will have a unique sound for every individual continent and village and area. But the soundtrack is pretty nice in my opinion. Like I said, it does a good job of communicating what it wants you to know, and it doesn't really clash with itself. It's not very disruptive if you were focusing. Sometimes I play the game on silent. It will not stop you from playing the game if you can't hear, especially because you're in third person. There's always the risk if you're in first person with sound turned off that you just don't know when somebody is sneaking up behind you. In this game, it doesn't matter. You can have the sound on, you can have it off. Totally your call, at your discretion. It will not negatively affect your gameplay as long as it won't negatively affect how you play games in general. You can only have one companion at a time. You can, I think, only have one familiar out at a time if you have a familiar. I believe, like I said, I don't always play spellcasters. That may not be correct. Oh, when you go to create a character, let's actually talk about that. When you go to create a character, it is very, very, very D&D. You choose your campaign. You choose which chapter in the campaign. I have some extra content. So my remastered Neverwinter Nights includes the Wailing Death, which is the plague, Shadows of Undrentide, and Hordes of the Underdark. Those are the 3 campaigns that you can get into. And then I also have some extra content. I think the remaster just has everything that was initially an expansion, or at least it has a good part of it. And it has, I believe, extra physical things for you to go through and do, not just extra character options to pick from. There's a couple of, I think this is just all the content that was put out, or like I said, a good part of it, because some of this is just patch notes. My contest of champions is literally, it has patch notes included with the plot. You can choose to play each of these. Neverwinter chess looks interesting. I don't know what that would be other than just actual chess. I'll have to check that out at some point. Anyways, you pick your campaign. You choose how many people are playing. Some things are single player only. Some things are not. You have the option of multiplayer after a bunch of patches, over 20 years ago, I think. They're not new. Exactly, but that was not a thing when I first started playing the game. I believe it was all single player. Or at least I didn't remember a multiplayer. I would have been 9 or 10, maybe 8 at the earliest, at the youngest. I want to play this with other people. I've not gotten a chance to yet, but everything I've seen looking at it looks good. It may be a completely new feature. I honestly don't remember. Anyways, back to making a character. So you choose your campaign, you choose how many people are playing with you. You can choose a pre-made character, which I believe is either one of your own or one of the pre-mades that were just initially part of the game if you don't know how to make a character or you don't feel like making your own character. You choose gender. We only have male or female in this game. It came out in the late 90s. They were not super inclusive. Race, dwarf, elf, gnome, halfling, half-elf, half-orc, and human. Choose your portrait. This can, I think, you can only choose from the pre-selected characters. I don't think there's any way of choosing like a customized thing. There's a fair amount of variety in the presets when it comes to race, but not a fair amount of like actual variety in the characters, if that makes sense. They're all mostly white adults. A lot of them are blonde-haired, or they're non-human. There's a couple that are non-human that are... I see a couple of people of color, but like 2 or maybe 3. So you choose your portrait, go on in. Then you have to choose your class. Again, basic. I want to say this is 3.0 rules. It may be 3.5. I'm not certain. Barbarian, bard, cleric, druid, fighter, monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, wizard. And then some that oh, right. You have to... Some have like particular race prerequisites. So arcane archer, you need to be half elf or elf. Assassin, you have to be an evil alignment. Blackguard has to be evil. Champion of Torm, you can't be evil, and you have to have a certain base attack bonus. Weapons master does not actually there we go. You have to have certain skills. So those are things that you can like get into if you build your character a certain way or if you level up into that class, I believe. So I'm not going to list all of them. There's a couple that look kind of cool. There's some prestige classes too, like the Purple Dragon Knight. Your requirement, you have to be non-evil and non-chaotic. So you have to be either neutral or good or lawful. Some combination of those 3. And this looks like almost this is an actual knight, so it's a fighter kind of. And then alignment, this is still kind of goes to, like I said, like kind of the older D&D. So they do have a little blurb telling you what the alignment actually means. You're on an axis from good to evil, and then lawful to chaotic, with neutral in the middle for both. This is locked in certain classes and certain alignments being either necessary or incompatible. That is the era we are talking about. Abilities. Point buy is the only option. You can click recommended, or you can point buy. There's really nothing else listed in this game. And then packages, you can choose like what type of starter you want. They don't actually give you any special abilities. They don't really do anything other than pick your skills and your feats for you, which is the last step. Kind of, you want that, and that's kind of tied up with your abilities, but packages kind of help you choose it, which is a little bit odd because your abilities is first in the list, but it's helpful if you don't necessarily know what you're doing. And then the last option is customize. Here you can actually make your character kind of look like you want them to. Again, late 90s, this was not a very realistic simulator image. So you can give your character, honestly, more range and skin tone than a lot of MMOs even 10 years ago. But it's not going to be perfect. The colors are always going to be weird. It doesn't actually matter what tone you pick. Hair colors are kind of the same. You're honestly, in this game, I kind of feel like your hair looks better than skin. Hair just kind of looks, I don't know. It just looks a little bit smoother, and I don't actually know what the difference there is, but it's fine. Body, you have two choices, thick or thin, and thin is not even really thin. You just have like wide or not wide. That's it. And then clothing, you're kind of just picking starter packages. And then there are tattoos. You can kind of choose which of the preset options your character has. And then you can actually pick your colors, primary and secondary, which I think is fun. And it's cool to almost pick colors. And then, so there's some arm and some leg options. There's a torso thing. And you're kind of picking, what combination of everything you want. And I believe that all combinations are technically possible. I believe so. I believe they've put in everything. Yeah. So, and I think the tattoos are actually done kind of well. If you're looking at like primary versus secondary colors, like it's pretty good. Pretty good setup. In general, I like this game because it is straightforward, tends not to be frustrating, is very easy to see and kind of track what you're doing. They're just both on the map and just like in your quest log. You have your quest log is automatically divided up between things you are doing and things you have completed. And there's a couple ways you can sort the quest that you're currently in the middle of. So you're kind of never really sitting there going, what's next? And going into completing the quest you have takes you into the areas that will give you more. You're not really going to run out of things to do unless you're just ignoring NPCs. That's probably my number one tip for playing this game is talk to everybody, click on everything that you are able to click on. That's it. If you're doing that, you'll be fine. Navigating the maps, you can see where you are. You can see what is of significance for your character at the time. If you didn't see something and your quest says that you have to go somewhere, chances are it just wasn't unlocked for you. There is a little bit of that. There is less of that, I believe, if I remember correctly. There is less of that in Chapter 1 than there is in Chapter 2. But in Chapter 1, it is honestly a little bit more compact. You're kind of in a certain section of the Citadel, and all of your quests are there, and you're just working there, and then you move on to the next corner, next part of the town. Chapter 2... it feels more open. You're going in and out of different map zones. It's more, the map is physically puts you in like a town that's on the edge of a forest. And then that forest has this other settlement over here and these paths in a cave. And like, you feel like you're going to different places more than in Chapter 1. But in Chapter 2, you tend to run back and forth a lot more as well. In Chapter 1, you tend to be, like I said, be in the area you're in, follow all the way through this house or this block or things that are close together. Chapter 2, you're going back and forth. Somebody in the town says, go find the dragon, and you go 2 areas over and then under a bridge and up across, literally climbing up the cliffs and then go under the thing and then into the cave, and there he is. And like, it feels more exploratory and less enclosed. I think, to bring this to a close, that the thing that I like the most about this game is that you never feel like you don't have a goal. You never feel like you're just sitting around waiting for something to happen or for you to find the next thing. Granted, it is a single-player MMO storyline game. It's not built for you to be sitting around waiting for other people or just leveling forever. It's a quest-based game. But if you are somebody who really likes like ticking off check marks, if you like ticking things off on a list, if you enjoy questing in video games, but you don't want to just sit there and do your 10 daily quests every day, you want to have a storyline that is progressing, this is a very good game. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and happy gaming.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.